Next, Boston has a new poet laureate, and her name is Porsha Olayiwola. She's both a World Poetry Slam and National Poetry Slam champion, and as she promotes poetry throughout the city, she's doing it on a platform of what she calls radical love. Here is the beginning of Olayiwola's poem, Boston Ode, performed here in our studio.
Can you name a love without rigor, without sweet ache and stretch and sunshine and sweat? Boston, parent of our hallowed America, someone else's God before the land was conquered, not the city we are born of, but it is a charitable home. The same way the city upon a hill gave birth to a country, and we are all now inside a nation and unbelonging at once.
Porsha Olayiwola, Boston's Poet Laureate, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Tell me, what is the role of the Poet Laureate as you see it?
The role of the laureate is to integrate poetry into the everyday lives of Bostonians, which is like very specific and vague at the same time. I have the privilege of being a younger laureate, and so I've been trying to take all the love I've been able to muster and figure out ways to deliver it via poetry through the city.
Well, where does the love come into it?
The way I think about it is, people write poems or any production of art. It literally comes from inside of a person, right? It's from a thing that doesn't exist. And I have to write this poem and I bring it out of myself. And suddenly I share it with the world and they get to see a bit of my inside and vice versa.
Down the street, a man did a hate speech to a black butch woman and someone gave it a 10. Someone said it was freedom. Poets are still over there cheering. I guess queer black woman ain't black enough. I guess the movement ain't meant to be a crossroad.
How did you develop your style? Was it work to develop it, or did you just find it was something that came inherently to you?
Yeah, I would say I'm still developing. Things constantly shift and change. But I would definitely say it's something that felt innate. I sit down and I write, and I sit down and I think, and then sometimes I open my mouth. And that's its whole other thing,
It is fascinating to conceptualize how the words may look on the page or read your work on the page, but then it's something altogether different to experience it. How does it feel for you to vocalize what you have written?
Yeah, I love that question. I'm a nerd. Most people interact with poetry when they're in 8th grade and they are forced to remember a poem for school. I don't know if that's true for you.
I think it sounds about right.
Yeah, Robert Frost, two roads diverged.
Yeah,
people know that one, right? And I think, why would my teachers make me read that and memorize it and then recite it? And I think I didn't really conceptualize that until I was memorizing and reading my own work, and how close I feel to the work. It becomes like a spiritual experience for me.
People wonder about black names, why the names aren't shorter, why the runaway syllables aren't easier to catch, why our names chime like music when they traverse between lobes, about why we name our children after cars, after movement, after freedom.
Well, to watch your performances, is that an accurate word?
Yeah, totally.
It builds and builds and builds, and there's an intensity. Is that something that just comes naturally, or is that built into how you've constructed the poem?
I think it's both, I think, everything is crafted, right? First there's the page. And it depends, right? Not all poems get memorized. But first there's the page, and then there's the craft of the performance. One thing I'm always constantly thinking about is how do I interact with the work and think only about the work in that moment. So I try not to think about the room, the floor, what I'm wearing. I don't even think about the poem. I try to think about literally the word that's coming out of my mouth in that exact moment, and only that word.
So going back to the kids as part of your role, how do you get them engaged in poetry? And do you find here in Boston that they have a concept of what poetry is already?
I love teenagers. They're my favorite people in the world. Teenagers also love me. I don't know what it is, but we have great relationships. And so oftentimes, I found for a while, my first several years in working, at the intersection of poetry and teenagers, that they only did it because they were my mentees and they were like hanging out. But they were all really great poets, just so happened, which is ironically how I started out.
What can poetry do that other art forms can't, in your estimation?
I think about poems, I think about language. like language, poems use language. Language is our number one source of communication as human beings, right? And language is inadequate. It's frugal with its word choice, unlike a novelist, for example. So we have to be very careful, and we have to get as close as we possibly can to explain exactly what it is that we mean. And I think because we try to get that close, it creates a whole nother level of intimacy, I think.
It's described in your bio as you having a dangerous imagination.
That's funny.
What does that mean?
I know. Nobody wants to know what that means. No.
I want to know what that means.
Right? I identify as a futurist, or Afrofuturist, and I play a lot with magical realism, sci-fi, fantasy, and use it as a tool to solve issues of folks of color. Sci-fi is weird. Sci-fi and fantasy is strange, especially when I think I tangle it with history mostly, and like some of the darker parts of American history. And I think that intersection.
Because you look at the surrealist nature of it, or the mystical nature of it.
Or I imagine a world. So, for example, I have a poem where I imagine a world where no one says the N-word. And I think that some people would think that was dangerous. And it's a futuristic world, right? It doesn't actually exist, unfortunately. But I paint that world. And whatever. And sometimes that might look not good to some people, and, but also simultaneously it's a world that is free of a type of, microaggression. So
I also find that the poetry sometimes gets put into that talking of boxes, the same box that classical music does, that people can't get out of their 8th grade selves. And I didn't get it then, it was forced down my throat, so how could I possibly understand it now? Do you find that is a problem as you're making your way through Boston as the poet laureate?
It's really interesting because there are so many types of poetry, right? And I have the interesting intersection of coming into poetry via the spoken word community. And it's really interesting because right now the canon is completely shifting, right? Like it's like classical music suddenly integrating hip hop or something. I don't know. But the canon is shifting around poetry, and a lot of the folks shaping the canon are from a traditionally spoken word background. And so I have the luxury or the tension, that's what we'll call it, of being at the intersection, of being the laureate, right, and also coming from that particular background. And so the shifting of the canon is also happening in the city's, appointment of me in and of itself is a shift of the canon. And so I feel like that's the conversation I'm mostly a part of, is how these two things marry.
Well, I can't let you go without asking what you think of Robert Frost now that you've had this life.
I like Frost. The thing is, all the poets are awesome. There's so many great poets. I read a poem and I say, what can I take from this? Or what is this poet teaching me? What is this poem doing that I love? And if it's not doing anything I love, what is it doing that I don't like? And how can I learn from that, So, I don't know. I like them all now. I do. I'm embarrassed to admit it.
No. Thank you so much for joining us. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you for having me.